You're not going to meet devil after you die. You already see it every single day. You come face to face with it constantly, and most of the time you don't even realize that that's what you're dealing with. When we hear the word devil, most of us imagine the same thing: some creature with horns, red eyes, sharp teeth, something scary, something external, something that lives in hell and waits for you after you die. And usually we assume that if devil exists, it is something that's going to harm us physically. But I don't think that's the idea of the devil ever really pointing to. If you look at Buddhism, there is this figure called Mara. Mara isn't actually evil in the way that we usually think of evil. Mara represents everything that obstructs awakening, everything that keeps a human being unconscious. And Mara has three daughters. First one is called Tanha, which is craving. The second one is Arati, which is boredom and discontent. And third one is Raga, which is passion or lust. What is interesting is that these names are not really foreign to us. We experience them on a daily basis. Cravings that we cannot seem to resist, that's tanha taking over. Moments of boredom where nothing feels meaningful anymore. And so when we make reckless or self destructive choices, it's arati. And when there is lust and uncontrolled desire, which has become such a dominant force in the modern world, often without self regulation, that's raga. And this is where I think most of us miss the point. These things are very, very human. Yes, but when they operate unconsciously, they become the real devil. Whether you want to call it addiction or your old frequency or your self sabotage, this is the actual struggle people are facing in their lifetime. And I don't think heaven and hell are places you go after you die. These are the states you experience here on earth. When you are trapped in compulsions, cravings, restlessness, and constant dissatisfaction, that is hell. When you start overcoming these patterns and move towards neutrality, clarity, self command, that's what heaven feels like. What's interesting is that if you look across religion, this idea keeps repeating itself in different languages. Christianity talks about temptation, Islam talks about nafs and shaitan, Judaism talks about yitzhar, hara, the lower inclination. Different symbols, different metaphors, but they're all pointing to the same internal struggle. Different languages, same truth. And this is where I think the idea of the devil completely gets misunderstood. Most tradition were never really trying to tell us that there is a creature somewhere outside of you keeping a track of your mistakes. What they were describing was a very psychological and energetic process, one that happens inside a human being when they are not aware, when their awareness drops, when you're not conscious of what's driving you or your actions, something else driving you. I will say that again. When you are not aware of what is driving you, something else starts to drive you. Now, if you will observe your life closely and honestly, you will notice that self sabotage does not start in some dramatic way. Nobody wakes up one day and decides to ruin their own process. It starts very, very subtly. A small comparison, a distraction, a need for relief, a moment of boredom that you don't want to deal with. One choice leads to another, and before you know it, you're stuck. I have experienced this very directly with comparison. There was a phase in my life where I did not even realize how much I was comparing myself to others. It was happening on a completely unconscious plane. I would look at what someone else was doing, and without noticing it, my own energy would drop. At one point, it got so bad that I could not move forward at all. Not because I lacked ideas or the ability, but because I was so busy measuring myself against others that I felt paralyzed. And the worst part is that I did not even know that comparison was the problem because it felt really normal. It felt automatic. It is something that everybody else was also doing. And the only way or the reason I was able to come out of that loop is because I started recognizing it in real life. I began noticing the exact moment comparison would start. That bodily sensation, mental shift, the urge to scroll or disengage, and that recognition itself created space. You cannot overcome something you are not aware of. You cannot overcome something you are not aware of. The moment it becomes conscious, it will start to lose its grip. This is exactly what Buddhism points to with Mara. Mara is not defeated by fighting him, it is defeated by seeing him clearly. The moment you recognize what's happening, the power dynamic changes. The same thing applies to relapse or any other habits of substance, unhealthy relationships, or even thought patterns. Most people don't relapse because they're weak, they relapse because they're bored, overstimulated, emotionally uncomfortable, or disconnected from themselves. That's Tanha and Arati working together, not as demons, but as unconscious patterns. Lust works in the same way. The thing is, desire itself is not the problem. Suppressing desire has never worked at any given moment. The problem is when desire runs without awareness, when impulse overrides discernment. That's what raga actually represents. That's why people often say, I don't know why I did that after self-sabotaging, and they're not lying because in that moment they were not fully present. Maybe some older pattern took over, older frequency, some old coping mechanism. That's what religions personified as devils, because it genuinely feels like something hijacks you. So when people ask whether if the devil exists, I think the more honest question is, in what form? It exists as the part of us that chooses comfort over growth, familiarity over truth, relief over alignment. And the work is also not about destroying that part, but about becoming conscious enough that it no longer runs your life. And the more conscious you become, the less dramatic the struggle feels. It stops being a war and starts being a practice. You'll be able to notice your cravings earlier. You'll catch the comparison sooner. You can sit with boredom a little longer, and slowly, without forcing anything, you move towards neutrality. This is where real clarity actually comes from. And with that, I will see you in the next video.